Hi everyone, it's Jill Foster here for Penny Black, and today we are going to stamp and paint some long-stemmed loveliness. So to create both of today's cards, I am using one of Penny Black's newest cling stamps. This is 40-729 Fresh Cut, and I just love the way that these roses are layered together and they have such a beautiful look of movement to them. And before we begin, I just wanted to mention I will have a full supply list of everything I am using, stamps, paints, everything will be up on screen at the very end of the video, and you can just hit pause at that time to check it out in more detail. Now to begin, I have created a palette of colors, and to do this I have used just an old palette. I think I picked it up at Walmart actually. It's meant to have the lid closed, but I just use it open all the way. And on the right hand side I am using Arteza gouache paints, and I've just squeezed them onto the palette, just sort of spread them out a little bit. And on the left hand side I am using Distress Ink REINKERS used as watercolors. And the gouache paints give more of an opaque, solid, creamy look, and the Distress Inks REINKERS, used as watercolors give more of a really vibrant, transparent look. So I really love mixing and matching these. I've done several videos with this exact same palette, and I will link those for you down in the YouTube description box below if you want a little bit more detail and more examples of using this palette. And I do have the exact colors used. They're my current favorites listed up on screen at the very end of the video. So to start off with, I decided I wanted to go ahead and paint my background. I have stamped that image fresh cut using Mento ink in the color of Toffee Crunch, and this color gives sort of like a cheater no line watercoloring look, because once everything is painted you do still see some of the details of the stamp design coming through, but it's not a dark black harsh line that you get when you stamp something in black. So it does look a little bit more hand painted, I think, but you don't have to strain to see what you're painting, and it's a little less critical that all of your shadows and shading go in the exact right places, because those lines are still there to sort of guide the eye once the card is completed. So I started out here with putting just a light layer of green gouache paint. It's very watered down, so it's not too opaque, but it does still have that very creamy look onto the leaves. Then I'm going back in while it is still wet and dropping just a little bit of the Distress Ink REINKER into the sort of the top part of the leaf where I want the most shadow. And you can see that those two mediums really blend well together. And so I just drop that in, and then I go back and blend it with some water. And when I say I blend it with some water, I rinse off my paintbrush in my cup of water, pat it on a paper towel so it is not too wet, and then blend those two together. So I did that for all of the leaves, and then following a similar process here on these roses. Now these roses are very small, they're quick to paint. You do not need to worry too much when you are doing these about getting all of the detail right, or when you're done that the petals look exactly as they are illustrated. What I do is I go in with my gouache paint where I want it to be darkest. I'm blending it with some water, and then I drop in that real vibrant Distress Ink REINKER where I want the darkest shadow to be, rinse off my brush, pat it on a paper towel, and then blend it out. I'm trying not to work petals that are right next to each other. That way that the painting doesn't start blending just all together and making one blob of pink. You can also use a heat gun to dry this in between, but there's quite a few petals and roses here that I found I could just sort of work my way around the image, coloring those in while I waited for the others to dry. So I stayed busy while I was doing that. So this, you can see here, now some of these are even extra detailed, and when they start getting real small like that, really all I worry about is getting a little bit darker area and leaving a little white at the tips of the petals and just alternating that. And that will also give the look of a very loosely hand painted rose. And you'll see that just a little bit more. I wanted to be sure to film that for you. So do not be intimidated by painting these. Um, the main thing I think is just to alternate your areas of light to dark, so you get that look of layers to the rose instead of just, like I said, one pink blob. So you can see here, I'm just continuing to paint these in, leaving a little bit of white there for that extra petal that's peeking out from behind, and mixing the gouache and the Distress ink reinkers used as watercolors. So you can see there on that petal in the front I left quite a bit of white. Now here is one that's more detailed. So what I did is I just went in with the gouache and just picked a few spots, almost like lines, especially up near the top, and painted that in. Then I'm going in with that Distress ink reinker and just putting it in the bottom. You can see I'm mainly just adding some lines in there, and then I'll go back in and blend those, and also try to leave some of that white up at the tips, and that will really make your flower come to life. It's a quick way to paint these in. It's not going to look exactly as it is illustrated, but it also is much easier and saves some time. And when you're going for a loose hand painted no line look, it doesn't need to look exactly as it is illustrated. So to finish off this card, I wanted to give it a little bit of distressing, of sort of a vintage look. So down here at the bottom, I'm applying I'm applying Tea Rose Archival ink. I picked this ink just because I love the color, and I applied it with an ink blending tool and a foam pad. Next, I stamped my sentiment. This is from our Dream Love sentiment set, a really fun sentiment set with a variety of different sentiments that you can use. I kept things very light and stamped this in an archival ink in the color of Shadow Gray, just right up at the top of the card. And you can see there that the style of the stamp, the way those roses are done on the stamp, you get beautiful dimension, and it's just so easy to create a beautiful card. So next up, I just wanted to show you a little bit different colorway and also positioning of the stamp on the card. You can see here in my painting, and you'll get a little better view here in just a moment. What I did on this one is I went in first with my darker color, which was a Distress ink reinker. I put it in the shadow areas, the darkest areas that I wanted it to be. And then what I'm doing is I'm going back with a very light yellow gouache paint and adding in the highlights. So that's one thing that's really nice about the gouache paint, is that it is fairly opaque. So the more the gouache paint is wet, or if you use it right out of the tube, it's going to have more of an opaque look to it. The more water you add to it, the more it's going to look like a watercolor. But you can go back in and really soften things up and add in highlights to finish off your design, or to fix things up if you have not remembered to leave those lighter areas in your stamping and your painting, which is something that happens to me often. So I love being able to go back in and just sort of add those areas of highlight in. Now on the leaves, I decided to go with more of sort of a vintage look. So I am using a sort of tannish brown color here on the leaves. And that is with the gouache paint, and it gives that really smooth, almost velvety texture once it dries. Then I will go in with just a touch of Distress ink reinker, just to darken up the darkest area of shadows while it's still wet, and then that will also blend with the gouache paint that's already down. Now if you don't have gouache paints, you could color these in with whatever medium you love, or just watercolors, but this was just something new I've been trying and really loving, so I wanted to share that with you. I think this stamp would also look beautiful stamped onto like a craft cardstock, or a toned gray paper and colored in with colored pencils. There's just really no limit to how you would like to color this. It is really fun to work with. So that's a peek there at how I did those leaves. I can always go back in with the gouache paint there over the top of the Distress ink reinker if that sort of got away from me a little bit. And then I added a little extra sort of yellowish green here between the two arrangements or stampings of those roses. So you can see I stamped that fresh cut stamp down on the bottom left hand corner and the upper right hand corner, and I just wanted to tie those in together and sort of reflect some of that yellow that is in those roses towards that upper right hand corner of the card. So I'm just putting that on while the paper is still wet and blending it with my paintbrush. Once again, to finish off this card, I also wanted to add a little bit of sponging to the corners just to intensify those colors and give it a bit of a distressed look. This is also a great way if you aren't completely happy with your background painting that you can sort of tie everything together by doing just a little bit of a light sponging over the top. And by light sponging means I'm not pressing very hard, especially when it approaches the rose, because I did not want to make those all turn green. And then to finish off this card, I have just stamped my sentiment. This is using a different sentiment set. This is called Love Quotes. Again, you might want to hit pause here and check out all the different beautiful sayings that are part of this stamp set. They're great for many different occasions and recipients. And here is a look at that finished card. I hope you enjoyed today's video and that it left you feeling inspired to do some stamping and some painting. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also hit that bell so you're notified every time we upload a new video. And you can connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, as well as our website and blog. And I will link all of those for you down in the YouTube description box below, along with links to the stamps that were used today. And if you stay tuned, up here on screen is that supply list as promised.